Welcome to Leadership by the Glass, the podcast where we explore leadership through the lens of wine, because leadership, like wine, is shaped by the context, character, and conditions around us. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Connolly, and each week I uncork a leadership idea, pair it with a wine, and talk about what it actually looks like to lead well and drink well in real life. So pour yourself something you enjoy, settle in, and let's get started. Before we jump into today's topic, I wanted to take a second and thank everybody for their feedback on the first episode. I'm going to continue to evolve, just like wine continues to evolve. And I hope that, like wine, this podcast gets better with time and with age. And so please feel free to send along any feedback, any ideas for topics that you might have. I genuinely appreciate everyone who is giving me a chance and taking the time to listen to this. I hope that it continues to be something that you will find valuable. I'd like you to think for a minute about a table, your favorite table. When I think about a table, I have so many different visions. I think about a crisp white linen tablecloth with silver. I think about a bare kitchen table with bodega glasses. I think about a patio table with sun just pouring across it. I think about a cooler, the flat top of a cooler, and sand and the smell of the salt air. These are all tables, and they're all different, and they all serve a different purpose. They're all surrounded by different people, and I have sat at each one of these tables, and at each one of these tables, I have shared a bottle with somebody. When I think about sharing a bottle of wine, I immediately think about one of the most pleasurable and enjoyable and committed, intimate experiences that you can have in life. To me, sharing a bottle, it's a conversation. It slows you down, and it sets an expectation that you are staying and you are committing to seeing this conversation with this person through to the end of the bottle. You pour, sip, you swirl, you smell, you do all the things, right? And over the course of that conversation, over the course of the evening, that bottle evolves. It starts as one thing and it ends as another, and so too does your conversation during that particular bottle. The wine you begin with, it's not the wine you end with. The oxygen changes it, the temperature changes it, the time changes it. This isn't a new idea, but I'm sure many of you have read the article recently. Wine Enthusiast actually explored how sharing a bottle is becoming less and less common. Younger drinkers are actually preferring to order by the glass if they order wine at all. And I was so surprised at some of the reasons that people gave for not wanting to share a bottle. They talked about how it felt really vulnerable. They talked about the commitment of it. They talked about the intimacy of it. Sharing a bottle does require commitment. It does require a mutual agreement to stay present. And so I started to really think about this because they're right. Sharing a bottle is a very intimate act that you do with somebody. But it's not just something I do with romantic partners. I share bottles with friends. I share bottles with colleagues. I share bottles with mentors. Because again, for me, it's really about that commitment to staying present and staying over the course of the evening. And so I started to really think about this less in context of what the physical bottle of wine entailed, and more in terms of what the actual act of doing it was saying about us. And what happens when we stop committing to staying? Is that what we're doing as a society? When I think about leadership to me is all relational. And relationships, good relationships, require time, and they require commitment to stay in the conversation. So I think there's a connection here. And I'd like to explore today the idea of love, leadership, wine, commitment, and sharing a bottle between two people and what that actually can mean in terms of leadership. During my doctoral studies, I got my doctorate at Southern New Hampshire University, and as a result, I had the opportunity to hear Dr. Paul LeBlanc speak multiple times about leadership. I found his core tenets just so engaging and interesting, and I really connected with what he was saying. Most recently, I saw him speak about his book, Broken. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, especially if you work in any kind of person-centered or people-centered industry. The book really looks at things like healthcare and education and these human-centered systems and how they're broken, how we're struggling with them, and what we can do to sort of fix them and bring our way back to what they're supposed to be. And I think at the core of this book, the thing that really stuck out to me is he uses the language of love to describe what institutions are missing. And I know what you're saying. The love and work and leadership, like it should not be together. At least that's what we're taught. But after hearing him speak, I really shifted that thought process because I do have love for my team. I do have love for my colleagues, and I have love for my job. It's not romantic love, but love in this particular scenario, it's an act of care. Love has dignity. Love is choosing to see people. And LeBlanc argues that institutions often prioritize efficiency and metrics over that human connection. And when that happens, systems may become optimized, but the people that are within those systems, they begin to feel invisible. They feel undervalued, and they don't commit to the institutions in the same way. And so even though in the short term things seem more efficient, long term that actually hurts us in many, many ways. This isn't new. We know this. If we think about research in emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman's kind of foundational research on emotional intelligence reinforces this idea. Research shows us, longitudinal studies in particular show us that organizational performance really increases when you have leaders that have high emotional intelligence, particularly empathy and self-awareness. Those teams that have those kind of leaders, they constantly outperform teams that solely rely on technical expertise. And why is that? Empathy allows us to, as leaders, to read emotional cues. It allows us to read tone. It allows us to make connections. And self-awareness prevents us from reacting impulsively to something. And so together, when we take empathy and when we take self-awareness, we can create psychological safety. And when we have psychological safety, we can see love develop, that love that I'm talking about, that care, that dignity. We've also seen research come out of Harvard. Amy Edmondson did a lot of research around high psychological safety in the workplace. And when we see high psychological safety, we see teams that are more innovative. We see teams that are resilient, right? We're always talking about resiliency and how can we get people to be more resilient. Psychological safety is a huge piece of that. When you have psychological safety, you're willing to admit mistakes. You're willing to take risks because you trust your team, you trust your leadership, and you trust that there's love there. Just like we would have love for our family and we want them to be the best version of themselves, so too should we have that with our teams that we lead. Psychological safety comes from really specific places, and I think it's often mistaken for a character trait. We often see a leader that might be charismatic, they might be warm, they might be personable, and so we mistakenly think that that person is creating psychological safety. But that's not really what does it. What really creates psychological safety are leaders who listen, leaders who don't punish vulnerability, and leaders who stay, leaders who are consistent, who show up, who finish the bottle, who stay for the conversation because they're interested in what their teams have to say. They value the input of others. The first glass in a bottle of wine is rarely where the magic happens. Sure, you can taste it and be blown away, but really it's that third glass from the bottle. It's over time where you really start to see the tannins mellow, particularly in a red glass of wine, and you start to really taste those intricacies that the winemaker wanted you to taste. And as your conversation evolves over the course of the bottle, that first conversation you're having at the beginning is probably pretty surface level. But by the time you get to that second or third glass of wine, you're being vulnerable, you're opening up, and you're really deepening that trust that you're building. Our first meetings are rarely magical. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes it's surface level. But over time, as we develop trust, we can start to build this sort of magical relationship with our teams. My work in particular deals with something called motivating language theory. Motivating language theory looks at 3 types of leadership communication that increase employee satisfaction, retention, creativity, a whole host of amazing outcomes. And those 3 big tenets are direction giving, clarity about our expectations, empathetic language, that care and concern for well-being of our teams, and meaning making, connecting our work to purpose. My research found that when leaders consistently used these 3 forms of communication in their written communication with colleagues, as well as their verbal communication, employees reported higher trust, stronger engagement, and greater commitment. Notice how that mirrors sharing a bottle. When we share a bottle, there's clarity. We are staying for this conversation. We're not unclear about whether this is an evening event or whether this is just one drink and we're leaving. We are clear that we are committed to this. It conveys empathy. We are here together. We are experiencing this together. And it creates meaning. This time matters. When you're sharing a bottle with somebody, you are saying that you matter to me, the time matters to me, and our experiencing this together matters to me. There's some other theories that connect in this that you might be interested in looking more into. Barbara Fredrickson has what's called the broad and build theory, and this tells us that our positive emotions can expand our thinking and build those long-term psychological resources, And so that when leaders create moments of connection, like sharing a bottle of wine, genuine moments, they are literally expanding our cognitive flexibility and our resilience. And so when we bring this all together, I think it's really important to realize that LeBlanc's view of leadership as love and emotional intelligence and broaden and build theory and Mayfield and Mayfield's motivating language research, all of this comes together. And it tells us that love and leadership, it's not sentimental. We're not talking about, again, erotic or romantic love. We're talking about care and dignity. And love and leadership can be strategic. It builds capacity. It builds resilience. It builds all of these things that we want our employees, our teams, our colleagues to have. It's things that we want to have too. I want to also address the part about staying in the conversation. We are always in a rush today. It seems like we're always looking for efficiency. I think I read an article recently that they're looking for ways to make sneakers propel us forward faster so we can travel quicker around town. It just feels like everything we're doing, we're always trying to optimize for efficiency, yes, but also for time. And that does seep into us in the everyday. It does. I think for me, wine is one of those few places where we still have to pause, where we still have to slow down and sip and savor and really give it its due, because we just don't do that in other parts of our lives anymore. And I even think about that in conversation. Think about a conversation that you maybe have had with someone on your team or a colleague. Did you rush it? Were you giving someone the space and time to sort of navigate and figure things out for themselves? Or were you trying to give them the answer so that you could get to the solution so that you could move forward with business? When leaders rush conversations, they evaluate things too quickly. If I were to take a glass of wine, take a quick sip and say, good, bad, faults aside, if wine has a fault, you're going to know that right away. But if I were to just take a sip of wine and say, oh, yep, it's this, and immediately analyze and not give it a chance to open, to evolve, not give myself time to smell it, to swirl it, to really let it hit different parts of my tongue, to compare it, and to really step back and maybe give it a second sip and really see, what does this really mean to me? What is in this glass? If I don't do that, I'm shortchanging the wine, I'm shortchanging the winemaker. I'm not getting everything out of this that the person intended. And when we evaluate conversations too quickly, we do the same thing with people. We default to efficiency and we unintentionally communicate that output matters more than people. What we care about in the conversation is not what the person is feeling or what they're trying to convey to us. We care about getting to the solution. And that's a really terrible thing to communicate. Imagine if an employee brings you a concern and you rushingly respond with a solution. That person maybe leaves and they try your solution, but they didn't learn any resilience from it. They don't feel like they could be vulnerable with you. Maybe they had a question that they really wanted to ask about it and they didn't get a chance to do that. So a present leader is going to allow that person to open up a little bit. They're going to ask a follow-up question. They're going to give time. In wine, we let the oxygen and the time and all the different elements evolve the wine. We need to do that as leaders too. We need room to breathe. We need space. We need to open that bottle and let it sit for a little bit. We need to stay at the table long enough to know what the real issue is. And if we only ever do a quick evaluation and only ever give a surface response and only sit at the table for a sip, we miss out on all that employee or all that team member is bringing to us. There's a lot of research around leadership credibility in many, many facets, but most of the research shows that leadership credibility is such a foundational piece of trust, and that when leaders are perceived as honest, competent, caring, their teams are far more willing to be vulnerable with them and far more willing to engage in things that might push psychological safety. And that caring piece, that's really important, because caring isn't a skill. It's something that makes you credible. You can't fake caring about someone. You do care about your team or you don't. They're going to know if you're faking it. And in fact, there's a lot of research to show if you are inauthentic in your actions, meaning if you try to fake care, or if you don't act in a way that people feel supported and feel that you are a credible person, then whatever communication you engage in with somebody, they're going to perceive that not only as neutral, not only will, even if you're saying something great, even if you're giving them praise, they're not going to receive that as praise. They're actually going to have a negative reaction to it. So it's so important that we really take the time to spend time with our people and to really show them that we care and love them. I want to go back to the bottle metaphor, sharing a bottle. You can't rush a Bordeaux. If you drink a Bordeaux too soon, you're going to miss all of the magical elements that make it great. Pour it immediately, you judge it, you miss the evolution. But if you give it time, you find so much nuance that you didn't know was there. So if I'm thinking about a wine for this week, I'm going to let you pick the wine, but I'm going to ask that you share a bottle with somebody. I'm so fascinated by Wine Enthusiast's article. I'm so interested in this idea of wine as being too intimate for two people to share a bottle. And I can see why they say that, because it's committing to a conversation, and it is committing to opening up both the wine and you. And so I can see that on a first date or early in a relationship, that might be scary. But when I think about some of the greatest conversations I've had with people, where I have learned the most, where I have learned about them, where they have learned about me, and where I have walked away with a stronger sense of the relationship, with a stronger sense of self, it's when I've taken the time to share the bottle. And again, it's not about the wine. It's not about the bottle. It's about that commitment to each other, that we're here for this. We're here for the evening. We're going to see this through. We value each other. So this week, I'm going to suggest that you split a bottle of Bordeaux. Bordeaux is one of those wines that you probably do want to decant it ahead of time, but as it evolves, as it changes, you just see so much more out of it, and it can make for such a lovely evening to just sit and really notice those changes with each other. There's a lot of different ones you could pick from. I happen to be enjoying Chateau Frank Maine. It's a Saint-Emilion Grand Cru. I love it. It's got a lot of berry. There's definitely some tobacco and herbs in there. I think there's a little bit of mineral as well. But what I really love is that you can drink it right away. You don't have to decant it maybe as long as some others. But over time, the tannins mellow, and you get this really great structure that is still round and still elegant in its own way. It's got a great finish. So I highly recommend this particular wine, but if not this particular wine, find a nice bottle of Bordeaux, open it up, let the conversation evolve. Commit to the time. The wine reveals itself, people reveal themselves. You don't want to rush to conclusions. You don't want to rush to judgment. You want to take the time to get to know the person sitting across from you, whether that's your partner of 20 years, whether it's a new colleague, whether it's a friend. Take the time to commit to really get to know that person. And I think that's what leadership is, right? Leadership is present. It is allowing for growth. It is listening. It's caring. It's acting with dignity. And bigger than all of that, it is really showing love, and showing love by caring about what other people have to say, what they think, their feelings, their vulnerabilities. So as you consider your leadership this week, what are you moving too quickly on? Where are you not truly noticing your people? Who on your team could use a little more of your time? We're all busy. We might have one-on-ones scheduled with people, but really that's more formal. I'm talking about the person who maybe needs some feedback in the moment. Where can you spend more time with somebody? Where can you replace efficiency with attention? Just once. And that's not to suggest that at the end of the day, we obviously have markers we need to meet. We have goals we need to achieve. But can we do that in a way that doesn't sacrifice the human experience for efficiency? Leadership isn't built on the first glass. It is built on a decision to stay, to see it through to the end of the bottle. So with that in mind, I'd like you to move into this week with your team with love, with care, And pour something you enjoy, share it if you can. Notice what happens when you give someone your full attention. And until next time, lead well and drink intentionally.